It's a new era for Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes. This is a year where Deion won't be coaching his sons for the first time, and now we get to see what Deion, the head coach, looks like. But we're not going to dive too much into that. We've already heard enough of that in terms of what that's going to look like. Everybody has an opinion. Let's do a deep dive into Colorado to see what this team can look like and what this coaching staff is working with. Now, this is a team that went 9-4 last year, a fairly impressive performance by this team, despite some of its limitations. And I think it's going to look drastically different than it did last year in 2025. This is an offense that was really exciting, and they did most of that stuff through the air. They are going to probably do things a little differently with the talent that they have coming in. Now, once again, this was a group that was active in the transfer portal, and they do lose quite a bit of talent that they had to replenish. Losing Travis Hunter as a wide receiver and a corner is going to hurt, plain and simple. He's so good. He was that good. And honestly, it'll be kind of sad to not see him suiting up on Saturdays anymore. It'll be weird to see him in a Jacksonville Jaguars uniform, but that's kind of how everything goes. Eventually, everybody moves on. Shedeur Sanders obviously is gone as well, so you need a new quarterback. You replace him with Caden Salter. You also might replace him with Julian Lewis. We'll dive into those two in a little bit. Three underrated players that I think you are going to notice their departures: Will Shepard, LaJohntay Wester, and Jimmy Horn Jr. Those were really good wide receivers for this team. But I think with the talent that you bring in from the portal, you feel like you have good players that could potentially step up and replace them. You also have players on the roster already that could do that as well. So bringing in a Sincere Brown from Campbell, Joseph Williams, who I think is a super underrated player. Not a lot of people are talking about him. You also get Hakeem Williams recently in the transfer portal. You have a number of players at wide receiver that are ready to potentially step up and be a big time contributor. It's still going to be an offense that throws the football. That much is not going to change, but it might look a little bit different. You also, the offensive line can always use work. You have a couple of returning starters, but you do bring in a ton of talent from the transfer portal. You bring in Zach Chrysler, Zarian McGill, Xavier Hill. You bring in a number of rotational players as well. You know, a big one is going to be Cooper Lovelace from Northwestern. So you have guys that could be big time players. But again, the reshuffling of the offensive line, this has to be a more physical group. And I think the players they bring in, purely based off size, will be able to do that. They have experience with the style of football that Colorado wants to play. And that style is kind of dictated by the quarterback. Now, Caden Salter, if he reaches his potential and we see what we saw from him 2 years ago, this is a Colorado team that's going to be just as dangerous, just maybe in a different capacity. This is going to be a team that runs the football a lot more. You know, even last year, Salter didn't throw the ball super well, but still had 1,886 yards, 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He also had 579 yards and 7 touchdowns. And that whole situation was obviously disappointing. You knew that he wanted to leave, and if he'd got his way, he'd be at Auburn right now. Colorado's kind of thankful that things didn't work out. They give him a place to land and show off his talent. I'm very curious to see what he looks like in Pat Shurmur's offense. This is not an offense that I would expect to do a ton of design quarterback runs, but that's what you're going to get with Caden Salter. And I'm curious to see how they get that all sorted out and how they get certain players to a level in which you're comfortable running that kind of offense. Now, the depth behind him, you obviously, Julian Lewis, whatever he's going to go by, he is a tremendously talented player that still needs some time. He is someone that doesn't have, you know, he's still very young, and that's where you're not necessarily locked in with him pushing Caden Salter for the starting spot, at least in a serious capacity. He probably shows flashes that make you think this kid's going to be special. You've seen that. But I think that is very clearly Caden Salter's job. And I think that he is going to be a big reason why they have success. And Julian Lewis is the future of this team. He just needs time to sit back and absorb what it's like to be in college football, because he should still be in high school. He should still be playing with his high school buddies, but he's a talented player that can reclassify and play in college now. So there is something to that. The hype is really exciting, but at the same time, you do have to remember that this kid's still really young. He needs some time to develop. He needs some time to work on his skill set, but you feel like the future is very bright for this team. Now, the rushing attack isn't just going to be the quarterback. The running backs do have to play their role as well. Dallin Hayden is a name to keep an eye on. Marshall Faulk really likes what he could do. 17 carries last year for 132 yards, averaged 7.8 yards per carry. But again, this is a team that really didn't run the football well at all. They're 134th, dead last in the FBS last year, with 65 yards per game as a team. Not one player, team. That is something that's going to drastically change this year. And you really don't need them to take huge steps. You don't need this to be a top 25 rushing attack. Not that it's going to be, but you need them to take slight steps. Can you be not triple digits? Can you be the 90th best rushing attack, the 80th? Kaidon Salter can still throw. I think that kind of gets flown under the radar of what he's capable of doing, because everybody just assumes he's going to run, and he is, but he can still throw. And the talent that he has coming back around him is going to make his life easier. There's going to be more balance, I think, in this offense than we've seen since Deion got here. And Salter is a big part of that. Hayden's part of it. Micah Welch is a young player that I think we have yet to see his best football is still ahead of him. I think that he's going to be a really exciting player. You also brought in Kalen Taylor from Incarnate Word, a guy who had 909 yards last year and 9 touchdowns. So you have a trio of running backs that should complement Kaidon Salter extremely well and make this offense, like I said, more balanced. And that takes a lot of pressure off of one particular player. I think we saw Shedeur Sanders try to do a lot last year, and there was a lot of pressure on him to try and make plays. That hopefully won't be the case for Kaidon Salter. There hopefully should be a little bit more balance where the offense can do a lot more things, give a lot more looks that defenses aren't prepared for. Now, the wide receiver position is going through some transition, but that doesn't mean that there isn't talent. I think there are plenty of names to keep an eye on. And one of the big names we already talked about, Joseph Williams. This is a guy who averaged nearly 20 yards per catch on a terrible Tulsa team. And that's a Tulsa team that was not throwing the football well. The quarterback position was always in flux. There was always a new guy throwing the football, and he was still consistent. He's already making big plays at Colorado too. If you paid attention to social media, you've seen a couple of big plays from him and what he's capable of doing. Amari Miller, same thing. We've seen flashes from him. We've seen really good things from him. We just want to see that more consistently. And it was hard, obviously, to do that when you're behind 4 really talented NFL players. So now he gets this chance to be that guy. Another guy that they're really excited about, we've heard a lot of good things, Draylen Miller could have a big year for the Buffs. You're looking for somebody to step up and be that go-to guy for Kaidon Salter in that passing attack. Draylen Miller could be that guy that does that. And you have plenty of options behind them as well. Hakeem Williams didn't exactly pan out at Florida State, but Florida State's also going through a ton of transition, and there's plenty of concerns with that program. Sincere Brown is making the jump from FCS to the FBS from Campbell, but he had a big year last year, 1,028 yards, 16.8 yards per catch. He also had 12 touchdowns. Can he do that at the next level? That's really the big question. You have other guys like Jack Histera that could play a role, Isaiah Harge, Terrell Timmons. You have plenty of options. And honestly, this might be better because this will be a group that does it by committee rather than 1 or 2 or even 3 guys at times. I think overall you feel like you have good depth, and in terms of talent, it's just going to come down to production. And I think this starting trio is going to fly under the radar early on. I think they have the ability to make some big plays that are going to get on some highlight reels. And this is an offense that should still be just as exciting. It's just going to be with different names running the show rather than the usual ones that you're expecting to see. Now, the offensive line is probably, it's almost kind of gets old after a while to talk about it, but the offensive line will be the biggest X factor for this team. Colorado's offensive line has been a topic of conversation for the last 2 years, and most of the time it's not in a good way. I think that probably changes this year. Jordan Seaton is a really good left tackle for them. He, in his 1 year with the Buffs so far, he has really held his own. He is someone that stepped in right off the bat and competed and thrived and had a ton of success. Now he has a year of experience under his belt, and he is one of the stable pieces of this group, one of the big returning pieces. Tyler Brown is the other one at right guard. You bring in a number of talented players from the transfer portal, but again, that's something we've seen the last couple of years, and at times it's been a disaster, but at times it's also worked. The talent you bring in this year, I think, has a little bit of a higher floor to them at worst. So bringing in someone like Zach Krister, who's 6'7", 340 pounds, gives you a big body that should be able to pave the way for that rushing attack that's looking to improve. Zarian McGill is someone who has 2 years of experience as a starting center, and he is someone that is going to make Kaidon Salter's life a lot better. Now, honestly, who the backup is for him, I'm not sure. I've yet to see anybody that's put a name in that spot and felt good about it. So maybe center depth is a concern there. Xavier Hill was an underrated transfer from Memphis. I don't think a lot of people expected Colorado to get him. He had plenty of offers, plenty of opportunities, but he chose the Buffs over a number of schools. You also bring in plenty of talent from the portal behind those guys. Larry Johnson from Tennessee will push Xavier Hill for starting time. Cooper Loveless, we talked about him. Philip Houston. You have a good group of backups that will give you some solid depth. Again, this is the group that if they can raise their floor at worst, you're in a much better place than you were in terms of finding balance last year. And that's where you look at areas where this group could potentially improve. Maybe that's one of them. And if they do, this offense is going to be really fun. Maybe just as exciting as last year's. It just is going to look different. And I'm really excited to watch Kaidon Salter and what he's capable of doing, because we've seen that at Liberty for the last 2 years. And now you're hoping that he can do that on a bigger stage. The defense has to be better as well. There are plenty of things that they can get better at, but we did see improvement in 2024. And you lose a couple of bigger names up front, but the secondary we'll dive into is kind of what took the big hits there, obviously. Now, a name that could turn into an absolute star is Quincy Wiggins. This is a guy who has all the talent in the world, 6'5", 255 pounds, has long arms. We know what he's capable of doing at his peak. It's just a matter of doing that consistently. Again, you can have all the talent in the world. If you can't put it together on the field, it's not going to go well. But Quincy Wiggins is someone that is ready to show what he can do. And if he plays at the level that he's capable of, he is the best defensive lineman on this team. Now, he does have to keep off a player like Arden Walker. Behind him, you have, I think, good depth at the edge position, where it's not a given that somebody is going to start over someone else right now. There's plenty of competition. Samuel Nkunlala is going to be on the other side. A solid year for the Buffs last year. 30 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Keaton Wade returns, 20 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. So that's an edge group that is in a really good place. Plenty of talent, also plenty of production. But again, Quincy Wiggins probably has the highest ceiling of all of those guys. The defensive tackle position, not really any different. Jaheim Oatis is going to be someone who is capable of raising the ceiling of this group. Oatis was really good in his initial time at Alabama. Injuries and inconsistent play sent him to the portal. He finds a new home with Colorado, and I think that he is going to have a lot of fun in the Big 12. I don't think a lot of Big 12 offensive linemen have seen a player with the size and the ability of Jaheim Oatis, so he is someone that could thrive. Same thing with Anquan Barnes Jr., 6'5", 340 pounds. Those are two guys that could really have a huge impact on this team by themselves. If they play to their potential and the Big 12 can't handle them, then you're looking at a team that takes huge steps, huge strides in 2025. The depth behind them is pretty solid as well. Amari McNeil is back, 25 tackles for him, 6 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks in 2024. Tavian Coleman comes in from Texas State. He had a solid year. Gabriel Lightfoot comes in from Fresno State. So you're in a really good place depth-wise. So if those guys don't live up to their potential, injuries become a concern, you have plenty of options behind them that can make life easier or maybe ease some of those concerns. So the defensive line feels like it's in a really good place on the edge, on the interior. You have really good starters with plenty of potential. You have good depth. So that's a group that should make things a lot easier for the guys behind them. And they probably need to do that because the linebackers are relatively uncertain right now. Now, Reginald Hughes and Martavius French come in after productive years. Both of them had 80 plus tackles and double-digit tackles for loss last year. Hughes comes in from Jacksonville State, 82 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. French from UTSA, 80 tackles, 17 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. But the ceiling of this group doesn't feel like it's as high as maybe we've seen in the past. You could also maybe turn to a Kylan Salter, comes in from TCU, Jeremiah Brown, who had 10 tackles last year, but the depth behind them isn't as good as the group up front. The ceiling of the linebacker starters also may not be what you want it to be either. So that's something to keep an eye on. The defensive line might have to be dominant while the linebackers figure things out. Don't get me wrong, I really like what Hughes and French can do, but I think there are some concerns about doing that at the group of 5 level versus doing it at the power 4 level. There are levels to this, obviously, but this staff feels pretty good about what they bring in. You just maybe don't have a ton of depth behind them where injuries could really hamper this group and maybe makes life a little bit more difficult for this defense. But again, their group up front will help them. They'll also help a secondary that is going through a bit of a transition. When you lose Travis Hunter, you're going to lose a special player and someone that you're not going to replace. You just can't. But you do have plenty of options to take that spot. It's not going to be the same productivity. I think that an underrated loss for this team, Cameron Silman-Craig, that's a guy who was a solid player for Colorado. He didn't get a ton of love because his name wasn't Travis Hunter. He didn't have Sanders as his last name, but that is someone who did a lot of really good things for this program. Shiloh Sanders is obviously gone. You also lost Colton Hood to the transfer portal late in the process, so that definitely was something that probably hurt you a little bit. But overall, they did bring in good talent from the portal. They also return a trio of guys that will start for them. Carter Stoutmeyer will be one of the safeties, 43 tackles last year, 7 passes defended. DJ McKinney is probably the next great corner at this program. I think that he has great skills that could put him in the NFL next year, and good size, 6'2", 180 pounds. You've seen a number of videos of him talking to Deion Sanders, really just absorbing any knowledge that he can get from his coach. And that's never going to be a bad thing. You learn some tricks of the trade from one of the best to do it. And you got to be alongside Travis Hunter and probably got targeted a little bit more because teams didn't want to test Hunter. Now you get a chance to be the alpha of this defense, of this secondary, and that gives you a new opportunity to grow, a bigger role to play. Preston Hodge was a former transfer who had a solid year, 33 tackles, 7 passes defended, 2 interceptions. He is someone that will play that nickel position pretty well, kind of like Cameron Silman-Craig did, and we'll see how he can do that again and what he's capable of doing. Derikus Davis comes in from Wyoming, someone who they're really excited about. They think he has great potential to fit in right away. A little bit of a smaller corner, if you will, at 5'10", but someone who is a big-time playmaker, and we saw that when he was with Wyoming. Tyvik Byard is going to be a name to keep an eye on. The USF transfer could have gone to a number of schools, but chose the Buffs over a lot of those. So that's a good overall starting group. You just maybe aren't necessarily sure how they gel quite yet. Behind them, guys like Makari Vickers, John Slaughter, Tion Parks, those are transfers that could play big roles in this secondary, and the depth will probably be a question until they are able to solidify themselves as those starters. And that plays a huge role in a team that is looking to potentially win 9 football games again. The over under right now is 6.5. Now, right now, the schedule doesn't present a ton of overly difficult challenges, but there are some big ones for sure. I think the ceiling is 8-4. I can hear an argument for something better, but I think realistically, 8-4 is the ceiling. You have a number of pieces that you have to replace. The linebackers are a concern. You lose some NFL talent at certain positions. The offensive line, until further notice, is always going to be in question, but there's plenty of room for people to exceed expectations. I think the floor would be 4-8, but that would be if something goes really wrong and things don't work out at multiple positions. Not as likely, but still a possibility. Playing Georgia Tech right off the bat, though it is at home, that's a tough way to start the year. You do get Delaware, a Houston team that could be a surprise this year, and Wyoming at home. That's a decent start, a start that could potentially see 3, maybe you go 4-0. You'd have to surprise Georgia Tech, but those are 3 for sure winnable games. A 3-1 start isn't bad. Then you go BYU at TCU, Iowa State. That is a tough 3-game stretch. All 3 of those teams are hoping to compete for a Big 12 championship. Then you get a bye week before you have an interesting stretch. You take a road trip to Utah. Playing at Utah is never fun, but that's a team that struggled last year. So maybe Colorado is in a better place. We'll see. Arizona is one of the worst teams in this conference, so that should be a good game for Colorado to get. And then a road trip to West Virginia. That's not a fun road trip to go on, but West Virginia is rebuilding as well. The final bye week before you go hosting Arizona State, and then a road trip to Kansas State. Those are 2 teams, again, that are competing for a Big 12 championship. So you have a number of contenders on your schedule, but if you're going to get to 8-4, you do have to beat some of those. And that means that you're exceeding a lot of people's expectations, the over hits, and you're in a good place. The channel thinks they're going to finish about where I think they are. You know, 1st through 4th, they say 18% of you say they're going to finish there. 67% is probably where I would be here at 5th through 8th. 11% say 9th through 12th. 3% say 13th through 16th. That would be a very interesting situation, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think 5th through 8th in the conference is where they'll sit, and it'll be an interesting season to talk about for sure. There's plenty of things to discuss with this team. Deion Sanders is going to show us if he can do this, which the last 2 years have pretty much told me, yes, he is very capable of doing it. It doesn't matter if he has his sons on his team or not. But that's going to be a question for a lot of people. Should still be plenty of optimism, plenty of excitement with this program, and we'll see what this group looks like. It's just going to look different than it was last year.